Frequently, students in writing classes are called upon to offer their insights into a given text or subject. In these instances, it may not be clear to students what is expected of them. Since its invention in the Middle Ages, the word insight has meant many things to many people. That language is a game of approximations and interrelationships complicates things further. Here are some examples of what writing instructors at PSU are looking for when they ask students for their insights.
I guess what I'm asking from them is to break down the individual pieces, the individual elements of the thing that I've asked them to analyze or the thing that I've asked them to read, and to say in their own words how these pieces are working together.
I would explain it by saying that I'm looking for you to interpret the data and to notice things that don't appear obvious on the surface. So what I tell my students in particular when they're trying to find insight or find an original way of looking at it, to look for patterns, to look especially for contradictions or things that seem paradoxical or counterintuitive, to look for controversies, relationships that don't appear obvious on the surface.
I think the general rule of thumb that I've learned over the years is to write in your own words twice as much as what you quote.
I would say his own thoughts when he was looking at the material and reading the book, what he was actually thinking about as opposed to what he read about. And if he said he was thinking about nothing, then I would tell him that he needed to go somewhere else when he read, or try jogging first, or go dancing and then read it again and see if he actually had some ideas about it. Because sometimes I think that students feel really afraid that they're not authorities on something. And it's really hard to get over that bias against yourself. But if you can create situations where you're in your element doing exactly what you want to do, and then you return to the uncomfortable project of reading, you can surprise yourself by having new insights into the stuff that you're looking at, I think.
I do know that in a writing class, I certainly want someone to find their own voice and to experiment. Art departments, the expectation is that you're not just looking at someone else's art, but you're also producing your own art. But you have to be passionate in order to get there to be a writer. You can't be given an assignment and then produce if there's no passion.
You'll notice both similarities and differences between the ways different instructors define insight.
Insight is what happens when your imagination allows you to make a connection between two things that you may not have seen the connections between before.
It implies to me a certain depth and heft to your vision, your ideas, and how you communicate that, really.
An insight is a realization of something that is not obvious at first glance, but requires looking more deeply into the material.
Insight automatically implies that the surface mechanisms or motivations are not the only motivations.
However, not all insights are equal. Writing instructors may find certain kinds of insights less than exemplary.
I don't like to see too many ism insights because they can be sort of false insights. It's very easy to shuffle material into some sort of category like, well, this is sexism, this is classism, this is racism, this is this various thing. And sometimes those kinds of insights, sometimes they can represent deep thinking, but sometimes they can be kind of a false category that cuts off deep thinking. So I like for students to push past those sort of obvious college categories for ways to think about text.
Use of the idea that society causes certain things without really defining what is meant by society, or without discarding the idea that we need to be more exact than society.
Is that the thing that I see over and over again in student writing that is not insightful, but students are using it, as their personal contribution to the paper, as their insight, is simple summary. So I try to make students move beyond summary, not just tell me what they're looking at or what they're seeing, what they're reading, but they need to move to that next step and include some kind of analysis of what they're looking at.
One of the best ways to develop your insights is by examining others' ideas. The following are writers these instructors recommend.
I think William James is a great writer to look at for understanding both definitions of insight and the actual process of insight, because much of his writing is about demonstrating the way that the mind works.
It's a guy named Luc Sant, who was he just wrote essays, a few of them about New York, but others like something about smoking, and just a discussion of how smoking had suddenly disappeared, how quickly it had disappeared from society for the most part. His ability to kind of be descriptive tended to be exciting, I guess, because it would make me remember or realize something.
I can think of Ursula Le Guin and Molly Gloss and Philip K. Dick.
One sort of popular essayist came to mind, and her name is Sarah Vowell, and she writes essays for public radio, and she publishes books of essays. And what I find really interesting about the way that she writes, and what I find so insightful, is that she's able to zero in on really, really minor details and using those minor details to make connections. So for instance, she describes in one of her essays her father's workbench, and it's littered with scraps of metal and bullet shell casings and all these things. And then a paragraph later, she describes her own teenage bedroom, and she talks about all of the things that are scattered out around her room, sheet music and pieces of instruments and things. She describes them in a way that connects them to each other, so she can see how the little details become part of communicating a bigger theme about the piece.
Not that his prose style is anything to aspire to, but at times it is, I should say. But Frederick Jameson, I really enjoy, particularly the political unconscious.
I think David Foster Wallace is an amazingly insightful person, the way that he can take his personal experience and also just observations of people in general, but he also uses research to come to really interesting, unusual insights.
Ultimately, the task of developing and conveying insights is your own, and you should strive for innovation and singularity. Exploring personal insight can be like a dream in which you are at once profoundly alone and surrounded by encouraging voices.